Good afternoon, everybody. I'm about to give a short commentary on Lecture 7 of the Foundations of Esotericism. And as you have probably discovered if you are reading along, that to give a commentary would be very difficult without possibly just rereading the lecture, because each of these lectures become more and more dense. The stenography obviously was not a complete stenography, and so each of the paragraphs is very dense, and I could spend hours just commenting on each of the paragraphs in each lecture. So I've decided to take 3 themes from this particular lecture and give a slightly larger context to some of the things and what they could mean for the way we understand anthroposophy and the way we understand human evolution. The first of these themes is that in this particular lecture we start to see evolution in a bigger context. So one of the things that he mentions is that each of the planetary bodies of the Earth has a particular task. Now that might already be quite a confronting idea for people, that the Earth has not always been the way that it is, and that they are people who are already researching through science how our sun had 3 previous suns. So the astronomers have been measuring the heavy metals in our present sun, and through that they've discovered that the sun had 3 previous forms to what it is, which means that our sun is in its 4th form. So astronomy is coming up with similar ideas to what Rudolf Steiner said, and he said that each of these suns or planetary evolutions as part of the evolution of consciousness had a task. So our particular one, the Earth itself, the Earth consciousness, is to develop divine love. The incarnation, or the sun before our one, had the task of developing divine wisdom. The one before that had the presence or the task of developing divine omnipotence, and the initial one was that of developing divine being. So in Steiner's language we see that each of these previous evolutionary processes had a name. The first one was called ancient Saturn, and then ancient Sun, ancient Moon, and our current one is known as the Earth planet, which is where we sort of meet in our modern language. So each of these tasks in the evolution of consciousness is that there was the development of the divine being, the divine omnipotence, divine wisdom, and then he also states that this particular process of our Earth is to develop divine love, and the next one, the 5th one, will be to develop divine fire. After the 5th there will be a 6th and 7th, but he doesn't actually give us the context of those particular tasks of the Earth's evolution. So we will come to this further in the next lectures about these 7 stages, or these 7 planetary cycles that we need to understand as the evolution of consciousness. So we already begin to see that he's drawing our attention towards large cycles of times with massive tasks then subdivided into further stages of tasks within each of the bigger tasks. I won't illuminate on that today, as there will be other opportunities for that. But what we see is that he is very keen for us to understand that everything, every being, every rank of being, from the highest of the gods and the divine creator beings, through the various stages of what we spoke yesterday, the Manakayas and the Bodhisattvas and the pure human beings, the kingdoms of the animals and the plants and the stones, but also the elemental beings as the receptive beings, are all going through an evolutionary process. And there are some beings who have gone through this process of evolving consciousness before us, and they have developed within themselves capacities to influence beings who are still at an earlier, I was going to say lower, but actually an earlier stage of the process of evolution. But each time that we go through a stage, and this is the unique part of our earthly body, the current planetary evolution of experiencing or developing divine love, is that our evolutionary consciousness compared to that of prior beings who have evolved consciousness is that we have gone deeper into matter and into a cosmos of duality. And therefore, by going deeper into matter, we have become individuated. And by being individuated, we have been cut off, so to say, from experiencing and of being influenced either by other entities of our own rank, but also by divine beings. Most of us with a consciousness these days would doubt or question the reality of divine guidance in the world, especially possibly even now in 2020. It's quite, in the current circumstances, there would be many people who would be trying to puzzle about any form of divine plan or divine guidance within the situations we find ourselves in. And yet that is exactly where we need to be, because if we are to develop love or go through the evolution of love as the possibility of our own planetary evolution, we can't love because we already see or experience the divine within another person. We have to, from our sense of isolation, which is an interesting thing that we are experiencing right now, that we are in a situation where the world is supposedly isolating from each other, but that might just be pushing us deeper and deeper into our own sense of self. But at that point, we have to overcome that sense of self-importance or that self-worth or other levels of that, and actually branch out and break through to experiencing and developing the capacity to love out of having lost it all. And we will find that the metaphors of many religious and mythological stories give us ways to try and experience the sense of the loss, known as the fall, or other ways of experiencing this or expressing this, that we have become isolated, individuated, and out of that place of grief and loss where we need to find and break open our capacity to love and have compassion. This is all very much where we are at. And we struggle because, of course, having become isolated and individuated, we have the freedom not to find it. And this is what is the great risk, so to say, of our stage. But he also then gives us in this lecture, which is the third thing that I'd like to comment upon, is that not only are we going through 7 stages of planetary evolution, not only are all beings going through evolution of consciousness, and therefore we have beings who have gone ahead of us in consciousness who are trying to guide us, and others that we are affecting and trying to guide in the future. We also see that there are different names, so to say, in religious philosophies for these different beings. The one that he brings here is the name of Jehovah, which he says is not an independent, unique, single being. It is a collective name for a consciousness of beings guiding a particular stage of consciousness. So this is where we see that the Jehovah consciousness is that of awakening the intellect, awakening what used to be the divine wisdom of the last planetary evolution into the individuated brain of the human being. So the Jehovah beings were a rank, so to say, of the sun beings who guided the divine consciousness into the brain of the human being so that the intellect could be born. And the comment, I suppose, that could be made there is that we start to see how Steiner is making a comment on any philosophy that claims that there is a monotheism or that God is a single entity. Much rather would he see that a group of beings working together create a divine unity of consciousness or a divine unity of task, and therefore will be seen as a oneness, a divine unity or a higher order of unity that works on one particular aspect of consciousness and not the monotheistic Christianity or the monotheistic religions. It's already a beginning of a reformation of the Christian understanding. And as I said right at the beginning, there are times where this particular lecture cycle we see Steiner working through his own understanding of the theosophical language, the Eastern esoteric language, the Western philosophies, and that of mystical Christianity. He's trying to bring these 4 languages into a kind of a melting pot or an alchemical melting pot within his soul to develop his own understanding of how they are all saying the same things, but wrestling with finding language for a Western mindset or a Christian mindset. This is the beginning of a great journey for him over a number of sort of a decade to 15 years in his life where he's developing this language. So those are the three things that I thought might be worthwhile to mention in this lecture. Lecture 7, definitely a question of monotheism, definitely drawing our attention to that there are evolutionary cycles of consciousness that go way beyond the human being. The human being is but one critical key in the whole evolutionary cycle, that we as human beings play a particular role at the moment in our individuated consciousness of the intellect to be able to birth divine love through our isolation. And then there are these 7 planetary stages that will become more and more evident as we go through the next lectures. So I'm wishing you well for this weekend, hoping that the forces of the sun and the spiritual sun can reawaken in us all, and that we find our strength and courage to go on this wonderful task of being human. Cheerio. Bye.